more into how we run the response to intervention model and what that looks like in a school setting, in a mainstream government school with no additional funding. So I'll go into a little bit about that as well, and how we manage that. So have we still got people joining, Lynn, or are we all here? She muted.
There's people coming in all the time, and for some reason the doorbell's also on. So I don't know how to switch that off. So you're going to get ringing, but
I think I know how to turn that off.
Okay, cool.
She says. I think it's part of the managing the settings. Okay, give me a minute. Because that's going to annoy us otherwise. Yeah. Okay, I wonder why that is binging like that. That's annoying. Okay, well, not to worry. We'll just have to put up with the doorbell. So obviously, as Pip said, I'm the assistant principal at Bentleigh West, but I didn't start out as the assistant principal at Bentleigh West. I started out as the intervention teacher. So I started out as the little person, had a little room, I guess it was a little box room, where I did some prep intervention, and it was just prep support. So really only back in 2013 was when I started the intervention role. And at that point, we really were just working with the preps on a 2-day-a-week capacity, whereas now we now have a whole team of staff. So there's 3 wonderful staff members who run our intervention team. We call it learning enhancement, because we find a lot of the students are at standard. So we don't need to support them, we need to keep them at standard. So we call them learning enhancement, and then that also gives us the ability to work on those high achievers also, which is why we changed the model to learning enhancement. So again, the model's really evolved across the years, but when I began, I really was the person we were working with those kids who had significant needs, mainly the preppies. But what I was finding is the work I was doing in intervention wasn't being mirrored in the classroom. So that's why if you haven't watched Stephen Capp's presentation from a few weeks ago, please go and have a look, because he talks about, and it's recorded by LDA on their website. So he talks about the whole school model and how we've changed the whole school model to make that work for everybody. So because it's no good going to intervention once a week, twice a week, every day, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, getting really good instruction, but then what was happening in the classroom just wasn't matching. So it wasn't mirroring what we were doing in intervention. So we were finding, well, it was great that these kids were actually coming back with lots of spelling rules, lots of morphology, like you saw Pip do, all of that information, but they were knowing almost more than some of their peers in the classroom, and they weren't getting enough repetition to get that multiple exposure back in the classroom. So what we've done, obviously over the time, it has been a model of change over 5 years. What we've also done is we've taken that RTI model, that response to intervention model, and our tiered support. So we were using it for literacy at the outset. We've then moved to use that for maths also. And then we've actually used that response to intervention model now for behaviour as well. So who are our tier 3 behaviour kids? Who are our tier 2 behaviour kids? Who do we really need to be monitoring? And then same for attendance. So really, we're looking at that RTA model for pretty much everything on how we can support those students. So, and again, it's a very flexible model. So we don't say, okay, they're in tier 3 for support at the moment. That might look like them getting everyday support for some students. But we don't want them to, obviously the ideal would be to have less at the top of that pyramid, which we'll talk to in a second. So it's a very fluid model of support. Some students will have support all the way through school. Some students will have a short intervention. It really depends on what they need. It's obviously evidence-based, and we're always making improvements. So one of the latest things we've done is looked at the writing revolution and brought some of those strategies in, and training up the staff. The other big thing, I guess, the biggest challenge that we've had, along with lots of schools that will say, well, we don't have the money to do this, which I'll get to. The biggest challenge probably is new students. So we've gone from a school of about 540 students to close to 700 in quite a short space of time. And that with itself brings in challenges, because you've got new students coming in, and if they're coming in beyond about grade 2 or 3, as you saw with Pip's little burst of morphology, they're behind the 8 ball because they don't have that knowledge. So they don't have it's really hard to catch them up then. So that's been the challenge. The other thing is that we, as I said, we began with literacy, but you'll notice probably one of our better turnarounds is our NAPLAN results for numeracy, because we've done the same thing. So we've changed the literacy model in the same way as the numeracy model, that we actually really haven't had the need for numeracy support as much as literacy, which has been really, really successful. So I just wanted to do a little bit of research. I don't know if I'm hoping some people will be familiar with this. Pam Snow's research, and this was Victorian teachers. And this was kind of what you take that model change. And it was, and I'm sure I've got some teachers in the room who are agreeing, it was really frustrating at the start when I was that learning support teacher going, this is what we need to be doing, this is what we need to be changing. And, you know, almost getting that flat forehead, banging your head against the wall and just not getting change. And it was really frustrating. And we knew, I mean, I knew with my own children, because I have 2 children who struggle with literacy, one's in year 7, one's in year 3. And I knew words with you look cover right checks and things like that that's got to be fixed. I knew that things weren't right, but it's how do you make that change when you're not in leadership, and that's really, really hard as a teacher, class teacher or a learning support teacher, because it's all very well sending them off to, you know, wonderful tutors once a week, but they really need it to be having it regularly. So I knew something had to change, but it was really, really hard to do so. And this is why it has to change, because they're still not coming out with that knowledge. And just before we started, I said to Pip, talk about chameleon prefixes, because a lot of teachers might not know what that is. She went, what do you mean they wouldn't know what that is? And then she went, everyone would know what a prefix is, wouldn't they, Mum? And I said, well, yeah, I would hope so. But again, they don't necessarily. And our teachers coming out of uni don't necessarily have that knowledge. And it's no one's fault. No one goes into teaching to do a bad job. I didn't have a lot of this knowledge not so many years ago. And we have to change, and we have to make those changes. But it's hard if you're at the ground and you're at that class teacher that knows the evidence and knows to make the change. And that's why LDA and people like companies like LDA are fantastic to help support us. So what we did, we looked at that model, and what we were finding is that we almost had this, the RTI pyramid flipped, because we didn't have this tiny proportion at the top. We had way too many at the top, and there was way too many, and it was growing. So what we were finding is in grade 3, we were having, you know, probably 10 to 15%, but that was growing by grade 5. So clearly whatever we were doing was not working, because there was too many students, and there was too many, and it was actually growing as you went from grade 3 to 5 as opposed to shrinking. So we knew that we did not have this tier 1 instruction right by any shape of the means and at all, and probably even the tier 2 instruction. So now what we do is we do have those students broken down for support. So there'll be the students who are at tier 3 who obviously have significant difficulties. They might be the students who don't attend Italian. So they would be exempt from Italian and have one-on-one support during that time, as well as small group support. So they would be seeing the learning support, the learning enhancement team several times a week. Some students, again, that might look like every day. Other students, that might be 2 or 3 times a week. We usually say a minimum of 2 times. Okay, so that's really fantastic. So we then have small group support. And again, you'll hope these students will move between the tiers. So they'll move from tier 2 and hopefully get back to tier 1 is where you want them. But again, some students will remain in these higher tiered support for the whole of their primary school. So we're not waiting for the model which our school certainly used to have, where we go, okay, they're going to start it in grade 1 and have some support. We'll give them 20 weeks of support, and that's it. We won't give them any more. Or we'll wait till grade 3 and then see that the wheels have fallen off the car, and then we'll give the intervention. So, and I'll talk a bit about assessment as well tonight and how we identify them. But we've really looked at that model, and we fine-tuned it to make sure that those students, you know, are really getting the best they can get. Okay. Again, we looked at the research, and I'm sure quite a lot of you are going to just touch on this because Steve talked a lot about it, and then we heard about it last week in the webinar as well. So really looked at that research, unpicked that research with our staff, because again, it was no good the intervention team having more knowledge than the class teachers. Or again, we get back to that problem of the kids up here knowing more than the kids in tier 1 and just being instructional casualties. So we really couldn't afford to do that. We needed our class teachers to be upskilled. So we've upskilled everybody, not just the learning intervention team. We've upskilled everybody to be Orton Gillingham MSL trained. So everybody has had the morphology training with Ron Yoshimoto as well. And slowly now we're rolling people through the writing revolution. So our model is that we will train everybody up to have those skills so that everybody could teach the students in their class with the highest possible needs. And the same with our intervention team. They are the highest skilled people we have. They have all done extensive training, and you know, we have teachers in that team as well, which is really, really good. So we've spent a lot of money on training our staff and putting that training in place and running through that training regularly, because again, the intervention team, they need to all work together. All right, so just again, looking at that simple view of reading, and we had a really good model, as I think Steve talked a bit about before, of our language comprehension stuff was great, but the phonics was not just there. And no one says it's just phonics. I don't know any researcher or any academic that says it's phonics alone. And that's why I got picked at the very beginning to show some of the morphology, because not only do we have structured phonics, but we have structured morphology. And that is systematic morphology teaching from foundation. And what we'll often find is, because of the model now and the curriculum being laid out so clearly, the students who are in learning enhancement can be pre-taught whatever's coming next in the classroom. So they're actually one step ahead of their classmates, because they've got that knowledge from learning enhancement to go back into the classroom. So they can be one step ahead. Okay, so really we've spent a lot of time unpicking the research with our staff. It's all very well as school leaders to have this knowledge, but our staff needed to have that knowledge. So now we can actually, they'll come to the learning enhancement team and they'll say, I've got this student, they're really struggling. And we'll say, well, what are they struggling on? What assessments have you already carried out? And if they haven't got anything to tell me, then I'll say go back and have another look, because they really need to have already done some research. Are they struggling in language comprehension? Are they struggling in their vocabulary? Are they struggling in their background knowledge? Is it the decoding? Is it their phonemic awareness? What is it that they're struggling in? Because again, we need to be able to give them the right intervention. So, and that's where I guess it's really tricky when schools go, what program do you use? We don't. We don't pick an intervention program off the shelf. We have got various things we pull from, the same as assessments, but we need to be really, really careful on fitting kids to programs for intervention, because all the kids' needs are very different. Their profiles are different, and that what they need in an intervention perspective is very, very different. But what we do have is some very strong systems in place to ensure that they get identified really, really early. So early intervention, they need it before grade 3. We wait way too long for these kids. So we often wait, you know, till grade 3, which is shocking. You know, if they're not at grade level by grade 3, there's a 74% chance they won't ever get there, which is horrific. Having 2 kids of my own who struggle. We know the stats between self-esteem, prison, mental health, and that's not what we're going to talk about on our lovely Wednesday night, because there's enough going on in the world at the moment with that. So we know we have to intervene early. So what we did do, one of the very first things we did when we changed the model is starting in prep, is we knew we had to intervene in prep. So we didn't want to wait till grade 1, which was the old model. We knew we had to give intervention in foundation as soon as they began school. So we now screen all of the foundation students in the October before they start school. Okay, so they start school in the February, the October preceded before that. We will do some phonemic awareness screening. We use the FELA, which is by Ros Nielsen, and it's she also wrote the SPAT-R. It's fabulous. So we use that assessment with every single student who comes into the schools. That's approximately 100 kids, and we'll screen their phonemic awareness. No, we're not diagnosing them, we're identifying who is likely to have some struggles with learning to read and with literacy. So we're not labeling, we're identifying them, okay, which is really, really important. So what we can do in week 2 or 3 of prep, of foundation, we can start intervention straight away. So they can start their small group phonemic awareness immediately. And they use Hegarty for that as well. And we use a lot of, we've got Marilyn Jager Adams' book, it's fabulous. So we also use that for phonemic awareness, but we intervene straight away. And the parents are also aware. That also allows us to have those conversations with the parents before they've begun school. Have you ever had any OT? Have you ever had any speech and language therapy? Has anyone in your family ever repeated a year at school? And you amazingly find out so many of the parents say, oh no, I've got dyslexia, or I repeated a year at school, or my brother has, or so we very quickly find out some family history there too. We also look at maths as well as the phonemic awareness. We also look at some fine and gross motor and some language skills. So it gives us a really good conversation start to see where those kids are coming in. It also gives us a bit of a lay of the land to know the cohort that are coming in as well, and to know, you know, how they compare to the previous cohort, or if they're a really high flyer. So we know those kids are already coming in, reading, decoding really, really well, and are ready to fly and take off and need an individual learning plan for extension, which has been our biggest issue lately, is the individual learning plans for extension, to be honest. Because again, we know that look what happens if we don't get in straight away. And it's just not fair for those kids that we're not identifying till. It's really hard when they arrive at our school in grade 3 or 4 or even beyond, or grade 5, and we've got to try and catch them up. Because, you know, you've got to intervene super, super early, as we said, or the Matthew effect will happen and those kids will fall further and further behind, which makes it very, very challenging. Okay, it's really important that I've just seen Tanya Seri put about the extension work, and we've really noticed that because of the way we're teaching, the curriculum is set about 12 to 18 months ahead. So a lot of our students in intervention are at standard because of the intervention that they've received or the teaching that they've received, but it also means we've got some really high flyers. So I know I was talking to one of the prep teachers today, and they're looking at one of the little boys in foundation who, you know, he's more than reading chapter books and, you know, is trying to extend those students. So those are the ones that we've really got to look at, and those are the parents saying, look, they're miles ahead, what can you do to extend them? So we're having, that's a big part of my role now as AP, is to make sure that those extension programs are there for them, and they've got that set up to support them. So one of the big things we always get, Steve and I will always get, well, but there's no funding. How do you afford to do this? Do you have a government school? No, we don't get any additional funding for it. We get the same as all the other government schools. Unfortunately, we're not like the Catholic system where they get the NCCD money directly to the school system either, with the number of students they have. So it's really important that what we do is just really careful with how we decide to spend our money. So we obviously only have one AP for a school of 700, and Steve. So we've got Steve, who is the principal, and myself. So we don't have a second AP, and that's out of choice. So we can fund the learning enhancement team. So we can afford to have a teacher in the learning enhancement team and some very highly skilled ES staff as well in that team, so that they can take the withdrawal response to intervention model. Okay, because we feel it's vital for our kids, and it supports. It might be another couple of classes as well that have a slightly larger classes, but the teachers are happy to have that if it means that they're going to get the intervention and support. Okay, because it's really important that, you know, everybody gets that opportunity if they need it to have that support. Again, we often get, yes, we do a systematic phonics instruction, but we also look extremely carefully at our vocabulary instruction. So the vocab scope and sequence is very clearly laid out from prep to 6. The phonemic awareness is very clearly laid out. The morphology is very clearly laid out. So the morphology, as you saw with, I don't know if you were here at the beginning and you saw Pip, there were some actions that she did. And the parts of the grammar would be within that as well. So we have very clear scope and sequences laid out. But what that means for RTI, that means that the kids who are in learning enhancement can be pre-taught and post-taught what's coming up. So it really helps them. So it helps those kids that are getting that intervention to have a heads up that they've already done that prefix. So when they come to do it in class, they already know it. So it means that the learning enhancement team can really closely align, obviously with the ILP goals as well. And most of the ILP setting I'm still involved in. With majority of the students, I'll still be involved in those WebEx meetings, or unless one of the learning enhancement teachers is going. So very rarely is it a class teacher sharing an ILP on their own. It's because it's not something we're clearly highly skilled at either, unfortunately, as setting those goals and making them clear. I mean, we read lots of ILPs about learn the common words. Well, which words, by when, how many words? So we'll actually label and put, these are the irregular words I want you to learn by the end of this term, and we'll list the words that clearly to spell. So we're making those goals really targeted, and that's taken a lot of work. I think last year in term 1, I think I attended 42 ILP meetings with some of the staff, because I'd rather the staff came and wanted that support and wanted that assistance, and getting everybody involved in there as well. So it's really important that we get any outside agencies, whether it's OTs, speechies, tutors, we all need to be on the same page. Otherwise, you know, heading in the same direction. Just move my slides down. So again, we've looked at a lot of, because we do have I think it's 24% of students with learning difficulties at our school. So it's around 150 kids on our NCCD data. We do have a lot of students with working memory difficulties and other executive functioning issues, all sorts of things. So we work really closely with some of the therapists, so some of the OTs and speechies for that. But really the school model, the model of EDI breaks that down for them anyway, because it really does break down the skills that your skill development, that you're working on one skill at a time. And it really helps to give those children the best success, because the structure of the school really allows them to know what's coming next. So we don't have that as a major issue, because there's very little, I guess, you know, independent tasks where they've got no idea what they're doing, because it's quite structured, which really helps a lot of our students, and it has helped the behaviour. So there's a lot less time spent managing challenging behaviours, and we certainly have them. That's not to say we don't have them. We've got plenty unfunded under the PSD funding for behaviour, but we don't have the challenges, because the structure is there now for the staff and they know what's happening. And the kids for support, I had a beautiful comment from one of my learning enhancement team today, how one of the students who is in at the moment, who has additional needs, wanted to come for an additional session in the learning enhancement room. And she said, but I saw you yesterday and, you know, I'm seeing you again tomorrow. And he said, but I want to see the wall. And they've got a wall of famous people. I should have taken a photo, actually. A wall of famous people with ADHD and dyslexia. And he wanted to just go and see that one day he's going to be like those people. And that was his exact words to her today. I want to just have a look at the wall. So he went over and had, but they really used that team, almost like counsellors, those 3 people in that learning enhancement team, because that's where I was as well before being AP, because the kids feel valued there. They listen to them. They understand that the work's tailored for them, but they know that they've got the best intentions to support them. So one of the big things we had to do was look at our assessments. And this took some time to get to. So one of the first things we did get rid of was the running records, because it didn't give us the data that we required. It got to the point where Steve and I didn't take it away. We had teachers knocking on the doors and saying, why are we doing all this time twice a term on running records? It's taking me a week. It's telling me a level, but it's not really telling me what their reading skills are. It's not telling me whether they're transposing letters, reversing letters, flipping letters, rotating letters, whether they're substituting words, similar words. It's not really telling me the data I want based on the simple view of reading, based on the research behind the way we teach reading at our school. So we did replace our assessment measures, and we replaced them with dibbles or dibbles, depending how you say it. So the reason I've used 2017 is this was the first cohort that's gone through the whole school since prep with the approach that they've got. So this cohort here are the kids who started in foundation, who had the best intervention, the best curriculum they could have laid out in front of them. But I love this graph because it's really, really clear. So have a look at how many kids here were in tier 3, tier 2 and tier 1. And look at what's happened as we've gone down and the model slightly changed. These probably got a bit of it. You know, when you look at that, you feel terrible because you feel like, look at all these poor kids here that we've not given the best instruction to. And it makes me feel sick at what's happened along the way. These are actually the cohort that got our fantastic NAPLAN results in last year, the year before last, sorry, 2 years ago. And they would have been in grade 5 this year. So we were gutted that NAPLAN was cancelled because these are the kids we've tracked all the way through. And we know the internal data is testing at that level too. There are also the kids that when we go to the next graph, so you can see here, this was them in grade 3. And that's why we were really looking forward to this year. You can see what happened with the numeracy results too, because we did the same thing. We made it really explicit. We made it the spelling and the grammar with the morphology. And you can see the only kids really that we had down at the bottom here were those newbies that have just come in grade 3 and had no instruction, but there was no one in numeracy. We had 1 student in band 3. And these kids in grade 5 blow your mind when you go and watch them. And this is why the kids who are in learning enhancement at tier 3 really are functioning, as you can see, quite high up. And as you can see, the reason I talked about extension is because look how many of these students are working, at a band 6, 7 level. And this was in grade 3. So when you look at them now in grade 5, they're exceptional. So, I mean, that's why we have to set the curriculum at a higher level, because you can see how many of them are functioning above. And we've got very few way down. And that included all the new students that had just arrived. This little one here was a brand new kid to the school. So that's why I use that data still, because that's the cohort that have had it laid out in front of them along the way. There is some people have asked about the data from last year, which was slightly different. We had 22 new students last year set NAPLAN who hadn't been at our school before. So if you want to have a look at 2019 data, that's why there's a dip, and I can quite clearly explain why there's a dip there. Because having 22 new kids come in, a big proportion of those couldn't read at all in grade 2. And what we had to do for those guys, which was really important to note, so when they came in 2018 into grade 2, we had to give them intensive phonics instruction. I had 7 kids who couldn't read a word. So I taught them for 10 hours a week. I taught their entire literacy block every day for those 7 kids, because they were that far behind that we had to give them that basically a big catch up to try and give them any hope of accessing our curriculum in the classroom. So again, that hasn't happened since, and that was a big proportion that year. We just had a lot of enrollments that we had to give them that boost to really try and catch them up, because some of them couldn't write their name. It was, they were that far behind. And there was a big group of them. So it just made sense to pull them out for that first term, give them that boost of literacy. And then I kept going with some of them one-on-one, some of them twice a week. It just depended on their needs. So it's very needs-based. And this is why we know that we can't just see them once a week. It's not going to be enough. We need to see them a minimum of at least twice, and most kids it's more than that. But we also need to get that instruction right in the classroom, because if they're not getting that repetition, so they will be doing their phonemes, their morphology in the classroom. So they will be getting that all the time, every day. They will be getting that vocabulary instruction in the classroom as well. So they'll be working through that. They'll get those to work on syllables. So we'll explicitly teach them the syllable types and how to break those words into syllables so that they can read and spell multisyllabic words. Just a bit of an example of some of the morphology work. You can see where those kids, once they've been explicitly taught the meaning of them and they know that ed is past tense and they know that un means not, they can then start really building words, but not until they've got that basic knowledge. All too often we jump into these kind of activities before we've actually taught them that port means to carry, trans means across. So they need X means out of, sub means below. So they know that, and I've got a dyslexic son in grade 3 who can tell me a lot of that prefix. His vocabulary is amazing. He's miles ahead with his vocab, and he can break those words down now, but he also knows the meaning of them. So he knows if he wants to write construct, it's far easier to write spell for him than build because it's phonetic, but he also knows that struct means to build and con means with or together. So to build it together. So he can work that out. So again, the intervention is a fun place to go. It's a lot of games and a lot of fun work that they work on. So again, here you can see some more work where they were doing some vocabulary work here. I think I got this from the letters training when I completed the letters training many years ago, because I've done most of the courses that are out there. If you want some comparisons, so I've done the Ron Yoshimoto's training, I've done Dyslexia Action from the UK, letters training, MSL OG, I've done a lot of them that are out there. I've carried through and done some training. So we've done a lot of work on vocabulary building as well, because again, you've got to be sure. I taught a student in intervention 2 or 3 years ago. She was functioning about a grade 15-year-old for vocab. So she was able to tell you my mission. I've got a little boy in grade 4 at the moment who reminds me a bit of her. And my mission each intervention lesson was to find a vocab word that they didn't know, because they can't read them, and the vocab, but you had to find books that were still exposing them to really high level vocab, because they're functioning so high, but their decoding was just holding them back. So again, it's getting that balance of exposing them to audiobooks. So our grade 5s are all given the audiobook, not just the kids who need them, but everybody gets that as their novel. So they will get the novel sent home and everybody can use the audio. It doesn't matter. So they can all, so they're not feeling different, because it gets really tricky when you get to grade 5, 6. And I know that because I have a year 7 who struggles, and she doesn't want to look different. She doesn't want to be different to her peers. She doesn't want to stand out. She doesn't want to be doing different things. So that's really important. So some of the assessments we use. So what we do is we use Dibbles across the school now, because again, taking PM running records away, teachers needed something, and they needed something to track. And we needed something as leaders to go, where are our kids sitting? So we use Dibbles across the school. So that's three times a year that they're tracking that data. It allows us to look, and the intervention team to unpick that data and look and say, okay, who's in the red there for their fluency and their accuracy? Who's in the red there for their comprehension? So they can really tailor who they're working with. For those who are not familiar, it also has materials there where you can progress monitor every week if you wanted to. So you could progress monitor more often than just the 3 times a year and track that. And that's what I try and encourage the class teachers to do, because we need to move away from a model of let's just send them to the learning enhancement room and they'll fix it, because it's not going to work without everybody on board, for all the teachers and the class teachers having that ownership. We do use PAT testing, and that will show us the growth year on year, because obviously we don't see that with NAPLAN, whereas we can still see that without NAPLAN this year. We can still see that cohort are doing really, really well with their PAT testing. We occasionally pull from Cars and Stars, and the reason I've left this one in is because I've got a student who's non-verbal. It's very hard for me to assess his fluency if he's non-verbal, because he can't read aloud to me. But I can use Cars and Stars to assess some of his comprehension and track his assessment there. So you've got to be careful on which assessments you use for which students. And again, it's not just one size fits all. There's no point me pulling out an assessment for a non-verbal student that assesses, as a speed assessment, because Dibbles is timed. So it's not always, and it's same with PAT testing. There might be some students that don't sit PAT testing. It's not going to be a one size fits all and go, this is what you're going to do. We use the motive assessments, which are free from Macquarie University. If you're not familiar with them, jump on, they're free and they're fabulous. So I use those for new students. So if we have a new student enrolled tomorrow, they won't be able to start at the school till we've carried out an assessment. So even obviously we only take students in zone anyway, but we would carry is so I can see if they're going to need some intervention. So we can start again straight away, not waiting a term to see where they're sitting and to know whether they're going to need some support or to know whether they need some extension. So we can see where they're sitting before they even start. So whether they're in prep, which we always said we assess the preps, but whether they're in prep or whether they're in grade 5, 6, it doesn't matter. We'll still carry out, the learning enhancement team will carry out those assessments. So I've just noticed I've got CPART written on here. We did use the CPART, but we've moved to the FELA now. Both are fabulous assessments that you could use though. And the FELA is spelled F-E-L-A. We did used to use the CPART. The reason our personal choice of using the FELA is it showed me those top high flyers as well. It went that bit further to show me their phonic knowledge and their reading and their decoding, so I could hit the ground running with those kids already reading, which was great. We have got SPAT-R, we've got various other phonemic awareness assessments, we've got the Hegarty, part of the Hegarty has some assessments within it. The other one I use a lot is if there is a complex case, I guess a more complex, tricky kid, that we're not unsure of unpicking their difficulties, I might pull on the TILS, which is T-I-L-L-S. We were actually in a trial with the Department of Ed last year and managed to get the TILS assessment. But what the TILS I really love, what it gives you is it gives you their language comprehension, it gives you a vocabulary assessment, a listening comprehension assessment. There's very few listening comprehension assessments out there. So it gives me all of that and it breaks it down from non-word spelling. It gives you a big profile of a student. So if we've got a kid that the learning enhancement team are struggling with to pinpoint really what's going on, I might come in and then do that TILS assessment, or they may do the TILS assessment. So we can really unpick what's going on and sometimes that will take us and go, okay, we need to send them off to see whether it's a paediatrician or whether there's autism there. It's actually identified a couple of students by doing some further assessments. So it really helps us. And again, with the TILS is great because you can pull on parts of it or all of it. You don't have to do the entire package, but yeah, really, really useful. Just a little bit more data for you to see here. So again, this is this cohort that we looked at before, but this is them in prep. So you could see most of them were already 12 months ahead of, other than the new students the student who was new, who came in halfway through knowing no phonemes. And then this is them when they got to grade 2. So you have got 50%, 55% of the cohort ahead, and you really have got that 6% with learning difficulties, as opposed to many schools which have 10 to 20%, which are lots of students who are instructional casualties are not necessarily there with your learning difficulties. So that's the kind of the data we're looking at now, and that's your pyramid, a much more accurate pyramid than what we had a couple of years ago or 5 years ago. We just didn't have that. So I saw someone, I'm trying to keep up with the chat too, someone just said, which motive assessments do you use? I use the CC2 a lot, which is this one, which gives you a score in children for words, regular words and words. Okay, but also use the LEST, which is the letter ID, sound ID as well. Some of our teachers use the non-word spelling. If you want to unpick some things. So we do, those are the main ones, but I have used most of them. Really, really useful. So that's well worth pulling from if you're not already accessing those. So here, just recap again. So new students are phonemic awareness and motive. Prep students, we use the FELA and their phonemic awareness plus some maths and literacy today. Grade 1, we do run the phonics screening check. We run that mid-year, so it was the end of last term that we ran the phonics screening check. And again, we do that early because most of our kids are at stage for then identify who we really need to target from that point on. Whole school model, we use Pat and Dybels, and then obviously we use internal diagnostic screening as well. So again, always standardized assessments, but ongoing screening, regular words based on the school scope and sequence for irregular words, that true, 6% of words are irregular, because when the kids know the phonics, the morphology, the etymology, there's not that many irregular words they've got to memorize. So we took that away really early on. Let's take home the magic words to learn and memorize. That was one of the first things that went. Sorry, jumped too far. So again, it's more than phonics. As I said to you at the beginning, it's everything structured, systematic across the school. So we start at the very, very beginning, that we start with structured morphology. And the reason we do structured morphology is because look how many prefix words and suffix words they need to know really early on. So once they've got that morphology, their vocabulary is far better in their writing. It's critical for their science. So, I mean, I was working with my year 6 or 7 daughter yesterday, working on perimeter, and they could tell me peri means around, meter means measure. So measure around. It's really quite simple to work out when you know that morphology behind maths. That's why we hammer all that really early on, and it improves their spelling. and their science as well. So once you've got that morphology and etymology, it's not just phonics, and that's really important for me to hammer, because that does get a bit of a rap out there with everybody just hammering about synthetic phonics. Yes, we have a very structured phonics program, but we also have a structured phonemic awareness program, and we also have a structured morphology and grammar and vocab. It's everything, and down to writing as well. So what we will also do is we won't go the whole way of going, okay, let's just go off and write, when they can't actually construct a sentence, when they haven't been taught what the verb is, when they haven't been taught that structured grammar of what makes a sentence. Because kids aren't taught that, and they're not explicitly taught, and yet expected when they get to year 7, and having just gone through a year 7 daughter, they're then expected to head off and write science reports when they can't actually construct a report in the first place. And again, there's places there that we support our kids with, because our kids with additional difficulties will use technology. So those kids will have a bring your own device, iPad or laptop. They'll be using the Microsoft 365 technology to dictation really successfully. And actually remote learning's been a godsend for that, because the kids have really hammered using the technology. So that's been one of the positives, I have to say. It's given them a real chance. We also use the Reading Doctor software from Bartek, who is one on LDA Council. So he has produced some new software, which we've paid for as a school and subscribed to. It is fabulous. So it will show you the reaction time for the students. So we can see how quickly they've answered on a certain phoneme, which irregular words. I can see how often they're going on. And we've seen, with remote learning, we've seen some phenomenal results with some of the kids who've been accessing it regularly. And he's got some research behind that, which is well worth having a look at too. It's not one of the apps, it's one of the Reading Doctor apps or one of the programs that exist. It's new. And we've subscribed for that as a school for prep to 2, but then all the kids from 3 to 6 who are in intervention also have access to that. So that's one of the other things that we've drawn upon. So we look at what the needs are. And again, if someone says tomorrow, this is fabulous, try this, as long as it has evidence and research and it's not just a let's try it, we will change and add things to the program and improve it, because it's fantastic. So we know that we want to get in early, but we know it's never too late. Obviously, we'll always give them as much input as they can. But I'm going to stop there, because I'm going to leave some time for some of the questions, and otherwise we'll run out of time, and I'll probably get interrupted by my children shortly. And I'll try and have a look at the chat and see if I can find some of the questions. Well, Michael, are you here now? Did I see?
I am, yes.
Cool.
It's working, so that's good.
That's good.
I think you've answered quite a few questions along the way.
Let me have a look and see. How do students with low working memory in remembering all the morphology and etymology? Well, a lot of the morphology has actions, which really helps the students with working memory difficulties. And again, it's a lot of repetition for those guys. So they would do the morphology with the actions every single day. And then they would also have that in learning enhancement too. So we would get a lot of, they do very well with that. School's opinion on dyslexic children learning a second language. Oh, this is a good one. I like this question. I don't know if anyone saw, I was on SBS Insight a couple of years ago, so 2017, I think it was, with a student who speaks 5 languages, or speaks multiple languages, and she's a super smart kid, probably, one of the students with the most profound difficulties I've ever taught. And she is a student that probably was not exempt from low to our school, because she spoke multiple languages. She was someone who you could not say, right, you're not doing Italian, because that was her strength. She struggled to read and write it, but that was her strength, was languages. So it's a case-by-case basis. So we do have a lot of students who don't do the second language because they get intervention in that time, but not all of them. And that's the only time we give support. So that's why I used her as an example, because for her, that would not have worked. Do you use the Australian curriculum or learning progressions? Well, in Victoria, we have our own curriculum. So we follow the Australian curriculum, and the Victorian government have written their own curriculum. So yes, we follow it, but we've written our own, again, we've written our really own clear curriculum for everything. So, I mean, if you look at the Bentleigh West curriculum, it's 68 pages long. For every single part is broken down, from grammar in grade 1 to how you define a noun, how you define a verb. It's completely broken down to exactly what the teachers, so the teacher knowledge is consistent across the school. Because one of the biggest things when I first started on this journey, and I started doing some PDs and things like that, I'd go into schools and they'd go, well, we have got a great synthetic phonics program. And the prep teacher was calling it Magic-y, the grade 1 teacher was calling it Bossy, the next one was calling it split vowel digraph, and there was no consistent language. So we've really hammered that consistent language, consistent use of terminology, and using the correct terminology, because the kids can cope with it when they're even in foundation. So morphology, someone is asking, what's the program you use? We were trained by Ron Yoshimoto. It's the Yoshimoto morphology. I'll write his name in the chat because you can Google him.
Yeah.
So all of our staff have had his training. He does a 5-day synthetic Orton Gillingham course. So the staff have done that, but then also the 1-day morphology, which really unpicks that morphological knowledge, because our staff just didn't. I certainly didn't have that. I remember, you know, not too long ago, not knowing what a chameleon prefix was, not knowing that knowledge until I went to America and went and tried to sit the structured literacy exam, and I had to do some serious study to ensure that I could, and I did pass it, so it was okay. I didn't tell anyone I was sitting it until I came back in case it was too challenging. But I sat there, certified structured literacy teacher exam with the IDA over there. And again, there was, you know, lots of knowledge and I had to upskill. So really, really important. Can we advocate to our state schools to bring a whole school classroom approach? Our daughter has intervention, multi-lit, but it stops when she leaves the classroom. Yeah, it's really challenging. And as I said, I was that intervention teacher who you were giving great evidence base, but it's really hard if they're not getting in the classroom, and it does take time. And as a parent, that's really challenging, and it takes time for change. I think that's the really important thing to remember, that this has taken us 5 to 6 years to get here, and we're nowhere near finished. Steve and I've got a lot we still want to put in place. It takes a long time. So if you're expecting the schools to change, you know, while your kids then and you're in 5, 6, or it's going to take time to get there. My daughter's in year 7 and she missed probably the best bit of Bentleigh West because she was not there at the beginning, whereas my son now in grade 3 has had much better instruction. So it's hard and it takes time to change.
A question earlier on, Sarah, that might be of interest. How did you in-service your staff with the writing revolution?
So we had quite a few of us. There was an Australian course that ran at the time that was suitable for us not long ago. So quite a few of us did that, including that Steve and I always do them as well, because if we don't know as leaders what's going on, it's very hard for us to say to the staff, this is what you should be doing. So we had us, and then we had one per each year level, I think it was, that sat that. But then the younger years one, the prep to 2 one, was in the middle of the night. We had 4 teachers who chose to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning. They didn't have to, I'll make that clear. And Steve also did it. I didn't, because I have 3 children at home, and it was, you know, during COVID times, and yeah, it just wasn't manageable. But we had, Steve, and then 4 or 5 of them got up through the 3 o'clock in the morning times, and all have done that training for the younger years, the prep to 2 years as well. So they've bought a lot of coffee the next day, and they were, so we've had a lot of staff have gone through that. And obviously we bought the book for every staff, but at least one member of each year level now has had that training. We've got a little working group that up to link in with our school novels. So the novel studies that we do. So for example, my son in grade 3 did Storm Boy during the last COVID time, last remote learning. So a lot of his writing revolution work was linked to Storm Boy, which was pretty phenomenal for a grade 3. When I'm looking at what my year 7's doing and going, wow, I might just give her the grade 3 Storm Boy. It would be fabulous. And again, now he's doing Charlotte's Web this term, and my daughter is she's in grade 6, Bridge to Tirabithia, and that's all linked to the writing revolution. So it makes it really easy to translate to remote learning, because they have a little book that kind of goes alongside it. When you have student teachers at Bentleigh West, so what is your sense of their knowledge of the science of reading? Not great. So when we have a student teacher, unfortunately, we can't let them straight into the classroom, because generally they don't have the knowledge to teach our kids, just as relief teachers struggle to have the knowledge to teach our kids. So what we've done is we use one main agency for relief teachers. I gave them a very similar talk to this, free for their relief agency teachers recently, because I'd rather upskill them if they're going to be coming to our school. We offered a couple of free places on Ron's training for that agency to send some of their staff, which was also really good, because we want the best staff to know what they're doing when they come in. It's very hard if you have a relief teacher that comes in and doesn't have this content knowledge to then teach our curriculum, because the kids will just ask you questions you can't answer. So again, the pre-service teachers have basically an induction program when they come that we go through our way of teaching the science of reading, obviously not as in-depth as we would like, and it would be much easier if they had that knowledge when they came. We have also appointed a lot of teachers who've done a placement with us and have got that knowledge already, because we find that they obviously have a lot more of the knowledge, or have been a relief teacher with us and have got that knowledge. How do you find children with low working memory, language disorder, or ASD go on the Bentleigh West curriculum? Again, the structure, because explicit direct instruction is very structured, a lot of the kids with ASD find it it works really well for them, because the structure, they know exactly what's coming. They know that this time is spelling mastery, this time is going to be this, as opposed to here's your 2 hours of English block, off you go for your group work, and let's rotate those groups. It's very structured and very explicit, so they cope with that. And again, they would have intervention, or they might be, if it's a language disorder, we'll have a speechy working with them as well. How do you approach individual teacher autonomy? Yes. So again, our staff at the very beginning, when we gave them the curriculum, so we pretty much gave them a curriculum, said in week 2, this is what you're teaching. So they were pretty happy that they didn't have to spend hours and hours of planning time, and you still get that autonomy. So you still get, my son's grade 3 teacher, who's pretty lively. You'll still get him literally getting the kids up and doing work on verbs, or, actually physically being the action, because there's a bit of so you still see their autonomy coming through, but again, it's the curriculum's consistent. So I think that's the difference, is that the planning's laid out for them, so they can spend their planning meetings talking about the how rather than what they're going to teach, but really how they're going to teach that explicitly. Yes, we do use spelling mastery. No, we don't use them across the year groups, and they've finished it by grade 4. So they finished the entire program by grade 4, because grade 2, for example, use book C, and then they've finished it by the time they get to grade 4, and that's that cohort we've been tracking, and anyone below that cohort has had that explicit instruction. There are a couple of students who don't do spelling mastery, who've got really significant difficulties, and the pace might be just too quick for them and too hard. Spelling mastery has worked wonders though in remote learning, I have to say, with a structured video to explain to the parents. It's very easy for them to follow at home. And again, for example, my son does spelling mastery in grade 3, but he only has 10 words for the week. He doesn't have any more than that. Some students might only have 5. And again, they'll be grouped by the morphology. We'll break them up into their phonemes. We'll really explain that to them.
They got year 2 and C.
We're getting a few late questions here.
That's all right.
But if we can just quickly answer some of those, and then I think we'll have to wrap it up.
Yeah. So let's have a look and see. Spelling mastery. Whole staff coming on board. In the early days, yes. But once they see what, for example, if we're coming back to response to intervention, they see what the intervention team are doing. They, when the kids are coming back knowing things like that, and they go, well, the data speaks for itself, the kids speak for themselves when they know the knowledge. And that's same with parents. When they go home explaining some of those spelling rules and explaining them, they will then, they've got nothing to really argue with. And, the data kind of speaks for itself. And you go, well, that class has made significant growth and they're a graduate teacher, and that class has not made so much growth, and because you're not quite so on board, then really those people have probably, I guess, jumped ship, and really the people who are here are want to be there and probably haven't moved on. So each year level, just a recommended leveled book. So we don't use leveled readers at all in the early years. It's all decodable books until they're fluently reading, which can be in prep, can be grade 1 or can be grade 2. They will be exposed to high level literature, of course. We have kept a lot of the non-fiction that were in the leveled books. We've kept a lot of those non-fictions for when they're fluently reading. It's got that vocab and background knowledge, and that's been a good use of the non-fictions. Have you come across any apps or other mobile technology you felt aligned with a simple view of reading? That's a good question. We have definitely used the Nessie apps. So we've kept those in school. We use Bartek's, obviously the reading doctor, the Osphonics. We've used those a little bit too. The decodable readers that are online are great for, especially now when we're not at school for quite some time. So that's been really, really good as well. I'm going to read all your questions. There's so many of them.
The homework one?
What about parents? Have you informed parents about your approach? So homework policy, that is a good question. Again, at the early days, yes, we did inform the parents with what we were doing, but the kids were going home explaining spelling rules, explaining that after a short vowel, when there's that short vowel there, you double the consonant before you add the suffix. That the kids were coming out with the language to the parents, so they didn't need that much education. But we do run in our prep, when we do our prep orientation, Steve and I do a session with the parents, because we do explain to them that we don't have the parents coming in to teach reading. Like we used to have the lovely old ladies next door in the old people's home come and hear readers. We don't do that anymore because it can be quite detrimental for the kids who struggle, particularly kids with dyslexia or any learning difficulties. We can do quite a lot of damage quite quickly, just as CRTs can if they don't have the knowledge, and can destroy a lot of good work. Really, really quickly. So we don't have those, the parents can come in and help in the library, or they can come in and read lovely rich literature to them to develop their language comprehension, but they don't help with reading. We do have, obviously, homework in the early years would be reading doctor, athletics, readers. We do encourage them to do their readers at home, obviously, and read books to them, like the novels. So from grade 2 upwards, the novels are there, but that doesn't mean the kids have to read those novels. The parents can read it to them, because all too often we take away reading to our kids way too early. We should still be reading to them in year 6, 7, beyond. You know, they can't access that high vocab, and we need to be doing that. So that's part of it. And we make that clear that it doesn't mean they have to read it. It can be read to them. It can be an audio book. That can be your homework. And then in grade 5, 6, they have a little bit more structured homework. And in grade 3 and 4, they have what we call some non-fiction reader type homework. And again, they don't have to read it. If they struggle with the language, it can be read to them, and they have to write 3 non-fiction facts down each day of the reader. So it's really getting that background knowledge and vocab, really hammering that now is where we're at too. After we know the phonics is in place, we know that's great, we know the spelling is great, this actually outstrips our reading results, spelling, which is unusual, but it's really hammering that background knowledge and vocab. It's a very long-winded answer to homework policy, but it is the end of the day.
I think we need to let you go now, Sarah. People will keep asking you questions all night, I think.
I'm sure. I'll try, and once I've fed my kids and they're all in bed, I'll have a look at Twitter.
And that's certainly a reflection on the quality of the presentation and the work that is going on at Bentleigh West and the work that I know that you're putting in there, and many of the
we
other
can't have
staff.
visitors at the moment. A few people are saying about visiting. Not at the moment. You don't want to come to Victoria at the moment.
No visiting to Victoria is allowed.
No,
at the moment,
I don't think it's going to be for quite some time.
Look, but thanks so much for your time, Sarah. Really, really appreciate you doing this this evening for us. And for those people who tuned in tonight, thanks so much. This presentation will be up. Sarah's recorded it. It will be
Hopefully,
on.
if it worked.
Yeah, I think it says it's recording, so that's a good sign. It will be on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days when I download it and upload it. So if my internet's working well, that should be up in the next couple of days. Next week, if you tune in, I will be the person presenting next week. I will be talking about my experiences in schools, both as a principal and as an executive director, with science of learning and science of reading programs that have worked, approaches that have worked, and things that haven't worked so well, and also some of the hurdles. I know some of the questions in the chat this evening have been about how do we get change to occur. So I've got some thoughts around that and some things that might work, change management, things that have worked, and some things to avoid. So that will be on same time, same place next week. Thanks so much for your attendance. And again, Sarah, thank you. That was just a wonderful presentation. So
thanks, Michael. I got my daughter to introduce me, Michael, so you missed that. I got my daughter to do the introduction.
Oh, bummer. I'll get my granddaughter next week. I'll one up you on that one.
3 months.
She's 3 months old. So
oh, awesome.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next week.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.